Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and my PowerPoint with you. So my name is Veronica Santorelli. I'm the CEO of Grasp Health. And today we are going to be talking about medical marijuana in assisted living, efficacy, ethics, and legalities. And, this is a really important topic and a topic that I'm very passionate about. Um, but let's call out the pink elephant in the room. There's some taboo here. Some of you are very well versed in the medical side of this plant, but there is a recreational side too. And so I do a lot of education and I do a lot of presentations. And, there's always a little humor at the beginning of my presentation because, this is what society has portrayed as a cannabis user, a stoner getting high, smoking a joint down the road and hotboxing a car. And it's perpetuated this stigma of, this is a joking matter. People are just using cannabis to get high. And, I think the number one question I get is, where are my free samples? So, so we know that there's, a humorous side to this industry and a recreational side, but we are very much on the clinical side or the medical side. And there's a very big difference between how you use the chemicals in this plant clinically versus how you're going to use them recreationally. So today we'll be really highlighting how it can be used clinically in assisted living to combat some of the biggest problems. So as far as objectives, today I wanted to discuss existing problems in assisted living and how medical cannabis could be a possible solution. I wanted to explore published scientific research proving cannabis is effective for a number of chronic health conditions. And then I want to identify personal bias that can impact a resident's access to medical cannabis, and then the path to overcoming some of those challenges. I think it's important just to set out some terms, just so as we review them, we talk about them, you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. There's propaganda terms in this industry, and then there's the scientific terms. Obviously, weed, pot, all of those terms. Medical marijuana, people think that that's the real scientific term for this plant. Marijuana itself is a term that's filled with propaganda. Cannabis sativa is actually the scientific term, so we refer to this plant as cannabis. And then cannabinoids are the chemical compounds that are very therapeutic that are found in this plant. So THC and CBD are two of the most well-known cannabinoids in this plant, and we'll talk about those most frequently today. There's hundreds of chemicals in that plant that are very therapeutic. There's a lot of research being done on the different, pharmacological actions of those other plant chemicals. But today we'll talk about what we know from the scientific research that's been done, some of the effects of THC and CBD. But what we want everyone to know is it's all the same thing. Medical marijuana is cannabis, are cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are the chemicals in that plant. So just to get that out there. And then CBD, so cannabidiol. This is everywhere right now. It's not all medical grade, they're selling it at Circle K right now. So be careful where you buy your CBD. But what we do know is that CBD did just pass clinical trials in the US on human subjects for pediatric seizure disorder. And there's a number of other pharmacological actions of CBD. It's a very powerful anti-inflammatory agent. It's an anxiolytic. It reduces anxiety. It's a neuroprotectant. It calms the nerves. It's an antidepressant. It's an anticonvulsant. It's non-psychoactive, so it does not cause a high at all. And it balances or reduces the psychoactive effects of THC. So if somebody has had too much THC and they're really high, if you give them a high dose of CBD, it can bring that high down. So using cannabis clinically, where we're not trying to get someone high, CBD is a big component in that. But THC is also very important, especially for people with really serious conditions. Often that's where we find THC is very helpful because THC does bind directly to the receptor site. So it's a much stronger feeling and effect. So THC is a very strong analgesic. It's the strongest analgesic in the plant. Some people have used CBD effectively for pain, and some people it doesn't touch their pain. Those are the people that need that stronger chemical compound of THC. It is a strong sedative. Even, some people say that they also sleep well with CBD, but CBD has also been known to be a stimulant for some people and their body chemistry. So, but THC is a sedative for everyone. I don't know anybody that gets hyper or less tired on THC. It's an antiemetic. It helps decrease nausea and vomiting. Um, it's an antidepressant. It's an antispasmodic. It reduces muscle spasms. It's an appetite stimulant, which is why a lot of oncologists recommend it for the side effects of chemotherapy and wasting syndrome. It does have anti-cancer properties, especially for certain types of tumors, and it can be intoxicating or psychoactive. Now, I say can be because it doesn't have to be. There are some people that don't like the effects of THC. Some people use it to get high. They like that psychoactive effect. That happens in recreational states. But for people that want to just feel better and need it for pain relief, it doesn't have to cause a high. And that's what we work with people on, and we educate them on how to use the right ratio of CBD and THC so that you feel better without getting high. Um, so to kind of kick off the meat of the presentation, I wanted to start with a quote from Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who is a neurologist and CNN's chief medical correspondent. And he had done a 3-part series on cannabis exploring the medical efficacy. And he gave our industry a lot of credibility. People across the nation who thought it was anecdotal and respect this neurologist, Dr. Gupta, it started to open some minds to the scientific side of this plant. So what he said is, I am more convinced than ever that it is irresponsible to not provide the best care we can, care that often may involve marijuana. I am not backing down on medical marijuana. I am doubling down. I mistakenly believed that the Drug Enforcement Agency listed marijuana as a Schedule I substance because of sound scientific proof. They didn't have the science to support that claim. It doesn't have a high potential for abuse, and there are very legitimate medical applications. In fact, sometimes marijuana is the only thing that works. Now let's think about that for a minute. The only thing that works. And what he's referring to is a very well-known case, and this happens with many other children and many other people across the nation. But Charlotte Figi was the little girl who had that very rare intractable seizure disorder that she would have thousands of seizures in a week, and cannabis saved her life and prolonged her life. She helped. Her condition helped pass legislation for medical cannabis programs across the nation. Colorado being one of the first, and Colorado became a state that had cannabis refugees, where parents with sick children that couldn't access medical cannabis legally in their state would move to Colorado specifically because they could access cannabis as a medicine. So the understanding of how important this plant is as a medicine was so heightened because of this little girl and her frail little body that was just ravaged by seizures. And cannabis was the only thing that worked. Now, I worked and studied under a nurse in San Diego who had a very similar situation. Her little boy would have hundreds of seizures in a week. Her neurologist actually told her, after they had tried absolutely everything under the sun, that to basically say goodbye to her child because they didn't know how to help him. And she had to go out and find cannabis on her own and learn how to use it. And, so she started this cannabis support group that brought together moms that had kids with these types of conditions, and they supported each other. They gave each other dosing strategies and taught the science, and really helped heal a lot of different very serious health conditions. And so I learned a lot working with her. But the fact that her own physician, her own neurologist, didn't understand about non-psychoactive CBD, that it could stop those seizures. You might have a resident, in fact, all of you have a percentage of residents right now that cannabis is the only thing that will help them. Cannabis is the only thing that will alleviate their pain. They might have gotten some benefit from a pharmaceutical that they've used. Chances are it caused other issues and caused other side effects. But there are patients who don't find true symptom relief without cannabinoids or cannabis. And so, your resident might be a little Charlotte. They might be that have that chemical makeup where the plant chemicals in medical marijuana will actually bring them the relief that they're looking for. So what I'd love you all to do is close your eyes and think about your most challenging residents. Who are those few residents that make your job very, very difficult? Maybe they are crying out in the middle of the night and disturbing other residents. Maybe they're aggressive with your staff. Maybe you have to call their family every night because of some disturbance. So think about those residents and the way that you can screen to understand if clinical cannabis could be effective for them is, well, first they would have to have one of these qualifying conditions. And most of the residents in your community might have a number of these conditions. So severe and chronic pain being the number one. About 90% of our certifications in Arizona come from a chronic pain diagnosis or comorbidities. So these are the qualifying conditions specifically for THC and to get a medical marijuana card. CBD, like we said, you can buy over the counter. But for people that have serious conditions like this, often they need that stronger compound. So cancer, ALS, Crohn's disease, agitation from Alzheimer's disease, wasting syndrome, severe nausea, seizures, anything that causes severe and persistent muscle spasm. So Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, multiple sclerosis, PTSD. Now, all of these conditions have published scientific research done on them proving cannabinoid efficacy, that cannabis is effective for treating the symptoms of these conditions. And some of them have actual robust clinical trials, and some of them have lab and rat models. But there's so many clinical trials happening right now, especially with CBD and other plant chemicals, across the world. We still are under federal prohibition with THC. And but right now, so CBD just passed clinical trials, like we mentioned earlier, for seizure disorders. And that made CBD now a Schedule 5 drug for that pharmaceutical grade. There is that same company has a product in development in phase 2 clinical trials right now that has half THC and half CBD. And they're using it right now in Europe to treat MS, muscle spasms and pain from MS. And it's very effective. It's passed clinical trials in Europe and the UK. And here it's going to pass clinical trials. And just like CBD forced the DEA to reschedule that compound, THC will be taken out of a Schedule 1 substance in the future as soon as those clinical trials are passed, or potentially even sooner through legislation. But these are the conditions where if you have a difficult resident, if they have one of these conditions, they can qualify for a medical marijuana card. That card costs anywhere from $150 to $300, depending on their needs. So what we do here is we do the clinical cannabis education. The education is the most important thing because there's so much misinformation out there, and this is really critical information for people's health that are dealing with serious conditions right now. We do the delivery. We deliver to a lot of assisted living communities and people that are still at home. We help set up policies. We've probably set up a lot of your policies that that are watching today. We customize them for different communities that we work with. We also help legislatively pass sensible policies across the nation so that patients have safe access and legal access to cannabis. We help patients get certified. Um, we help them with product and dosing recommendations. Even physicians that specialize in certifications often aren't knowledgeable on dosing strategies for specific health conditions. So that's something that we're able to help licensed medical professionals, inform their patients of. And then we cater to seniors with chronic health conditions. So we're members of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, which means we use all the published research that comes out to guide the dosing recommendations. We just saw an updated video on hospice dosing and different strategies that work for different people's body chemistries. So we're very well versed in helping seniors. And because of that, we very much understand some of the challenges that you have in your assisted living communities. And I would say probably the number one, besides chronic pain, that reason that people reach out to us is combative residents. So residents that are disturbing other residents, that they are getting in fights, shoving other residents. They might be going out to the garden and throwing all the plants, or literally throwing chairs. I mean, it's all over the map. And this interrupts tours when your salespeople are trying to tour somebody. This is also really hard for anybody hearing this or witnessing it, because we know that resident is suffering. And so, this issue leads to a lot of other challenges, of course. Um, you know, by the time somebody comes to one of your communities, sometimes they, want to move in and they're excited to be around other seniors, and maybe they start in your independent living, but some, they don't want to be there. And it was a really difficult decision to even have that family bring their grandmother or their mom or their dad or their husband or their wife to your community. They feel guilty. I know when my dad had to put my nana in assisted living, it was a really difficult decision. And these poor families have been through the ringer. They've often tried to keep their loved one at home as long as they possibly can. And they have trauma from that, for everything from they're trying to deal with their aggression or their agitation at home, um, to how it's affecting other family members, to they're dealing with insurance and claims, and caregiving companies, and just trying to clean up the house and sell the house. I mean, they're dealing with so much, especially as the medical power of attorney. So when you and when they finally get to that point where they're ready to move their family member in, and they do that so that they have help. Well, if they're getting a call every single night that that their loved one is causing problems, is being combative, is um, you know won't stay out of their neighbor's room at night, they fell and broke their arm or broke their wrist or broke their hip, and had to be taken to the hospital. Those are not fun conversations. Any of you that have to make those calls, I feel for you. So we know that causes the problem. And then another problem that's caused is, of course, staff turnover. We have a massive caregiver shortage right now. And, put yourself in your caregiver's shoes. If you have these residents that are resistant to self-care, that when they soil themselves, they won't allow changing, when they need to shower, they fight showering and changing, that caregiver doesn't want to come to work, or maybe they got injured from a resident, and that's it leads to a lot of different issues, employee comp, time off, loss of revenue, turnover, and all of that does affect your bottom line. And for those of you that are responsible for the business, you're losing residents, your staff is turning over because they can't handle behaviors like this. Maybe you're asking the family to take their loved one to another community, which creates not a great reputation for they're not going to speak highly of you to neighbors and to other people in a similar situation if you weren't able to help them from the first time they moved them in. Having to move somebody from community to community because of their behaviors, that alone is traumatic, both for the family and for the resident. So I guess what we're here to say is, it doesn't have to be that way. There are possibilities and solutions out there. And the fact that there's now published research on the efficacy that cannabis has with dementia. Banner Hospital Banner Alzheimer's is going to be doing some research on sundowning behaviors and how cannabis can help address and calm those agitated behaviors. This is all published research discussing how THC can help address that nighttime agitation and with severe dementia cases. The other, research talks about how it can help slow down neurodegeneration, can help remove and prevent that amyloid plaque buildup. So there's more research to be done, but it's what we have seen is that it's a lot safer and more effective than a lot of the pharmaceuticals that are being used. But don't take it from me. Here's Taylor, who's the director of wellness for Auberge, and she was one of the first director of wellness that was willing to get educated and start utilizing this within her community. So let's hear from Taylor. I think I have to take it out of full screen mode to play this. So let me just go ahead and play that.
My name is Taylor. I've been working as a nurse for the last 13 years in the dementia population. I absolutely feel that using medical cannabis in a setting for dementia is beneficial. I think using grass has opened our eyes because there are so many different forms. It has taken a stress off of the family members immensely about using the app for their phone. They can go on the website on their computer, they can order it, they know that it will get delivered. Being able to see the difference of a resident coming into the community who is just on the regular generic prescriptions of their dementia medications and their antipsychotics, and to be introduced to cannabis and seeing the change of behavior, of emotion, it's amazing.
So I like that story. Obviously, Taylor has a lot of experience now working with cannabis and using it effectively in her community. And I just want to just hit on really quickly one of the things that she said in regards to emotion and behavior. And if I can, it was not on the right slide. There we go. So as far as emotions and behavior, so what I hear all the time is that a lot of the pharmaceuticals that they traditionally use for memory care patients sometimes makes them more agitated. Other times it just totally sedates them and makes them a zombie. They lose that, who they are. Their family members don't, they're not able to have that same personality that their family is used to. And so the side effects of the pharmaceuticals versus, we're usually using cannabis to address either agitation or anxiety with dementia. With high anxiety, we're usually using CBD or higher CBD. And then with aggression and agitation, we're using usually higher THC. And so the main thing that we're trying to address as far as symptom relief is that agitation. But then what we find is that they're sleeping better, they're eating better, they're socializing with community members in a better way. They're calmer. They, some gain back functions that they've lost for years. We have had people speak again that lost speech. Sometimes we've had a man gain back reproductive function. So many different things that have come because everybody's body chemistry is so unique and so different that. And what cannabinoids or cannabis does is it restores homeostasis. So functions can come back that were once lost. Everybody has a little bit of a different effect. Some people don't tolerate cannabis well. In general, it's very well tolerated and works very well with other pharmaceuticals, which is great. There's no harmful interactions. But some people don't like the effects of THC, even though they have such a level of pain that they need that. So that's when we're really working with much higher doses of CBD. But regardless, I think that with dementia, especially when you're trying to address that main behavior and you have benefits instead of additional side effects, that's always a wonderful thing. Another thing that I wanted to bring up was the synergistic nature of opioids and cannabinoids. That there's published research showing that, um, you know, first of all, let me just say that, often we get people off of opioids. A lot of people come to use medical cannabis to get off of their opioids for chronic pain management. And that does happen all the time. People use cannabis effectively and it addresses their pain enough to wean them off the opioids. Other patients might do well with a low dose of an opioid, especially in hospice care. The problem is that a lot of people have terrible side effects from opioids: constipation, irritability, some nausea. And so when you can lower the dose of that opioid and introduce a low dose of cannabis, it actually, the science shows that it increases the analgesic properties of the opioid, or the pain relieving properties of the opioid, um, while actually also making it safer. The safety profile increase because you have a lower dose of an opioid. So recently we had a woman, this 93-year-old woman on hospice, and she didn't really want to use cannabis. She was under the mentality, the kind of old school mentality, but she'd been recommended it so many times, and she really wanted to have a better quality of life. She'd lost her zest for eating, she had lost her appetite, and she wanted to enjoy food again. So that was what we were trying to address with incorporating cannabis. But when I followed up with her and asked her how it was helping her, she said, yeah, it's helping with the appetite, just like we wanted. She said, but what I'm also realizing is it's treating pain I didn't even know I had. And, my takeaway with that is that a lot of seniors are on such a high dose of opioids and they're just not even working anymore, that when you introduce a low dose of cannabis with that, it kicks that analgesic property back up in the opioid and suddenly they're pain free. And so we're trying to educate pain management doctors on this, but I think this is important to know for dementia care, where, sometimes your residents can't actually express, their pain. And so, if cannabis can help address that unexpressed pain, you might have a less agitated resident. So this is the first resident that we started using cannabis with in memory care at Auberge. Now it was Silverado, now Auberge. And I'm going to play this. Some of you have seen it, but Roger, who speaks on this, he was a very conservative politician who voted against the cannabis program year after year. He just thought it was a Trojan horse for the recreational movement. And I'll never forget the first call that we had. He was like, I don't know about this. He's like, I don't want my wife high. He's like, I've been told this is bad all my life. And he was hesitant, but he was at the end of his rope. Aine had been in and out of 6 different geriatric psych wards and different communities that couldn't handle her behaviors. And he was ready to finally try it because he couldn't take it anymore. So let's hear from his words how it was able to help Aine.
My wife was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. As the disease progressed, she became increasingly agitated and aggressive. Part of the problem was that she turned out to be allergic to antipsychotics. So we were to the point where we're getting desperate in terms of our abilities to control her behaviors. And one of the doctors said, hey, why don't you try medical marijuana as an option? And so we were able to get a prescription for it. Grass turned out to be a godsend. She's no longer aggressive. Her anxiety levels are down. She's eating more, so she's going back in the right direction. What you have to try to do is make it as painless as possible, make their lives as rewarding as you possibly can before it ends. And this has helped.
So I guess, that's the possibility, right? Somebody that nothing's working for them right now, and they're affecting your staff, they're affecting your community. they're affecting other residents, they are having a horrible time. That is the possibility, right? Calm residents that are going back in the right direction. And when you provide that solution for families, you know, Taylor will talk to families about it when it's needed. You know, we don't have every single resident. We're not trying to have every single resident use this. But there are going to be perfect candidates for it. And when you're educated on it, and when you share that this is a modality that's allowed in your community, and here's how it might help, when it does, that family member is so grateful. I mean, they will hug you, they will be in tears. It's very dramatic when you go from that point of trauma and feeling just helpless, and like what is the solution here? How do I help, alleviate this? Feeling guilty, that you're leaving your grandmother, you're leaving your husband or wife in this community and walking away because you can't take care of them anymore. But when you find a solution that works, if cannabis is that solution, that family will tell everybody about you. They'll tell everybody about your organization and how helpful you've been. And your staff will be a lot happier. If they now can know that that resident is going to be smiling, when you know a difficult time, if around 1 p.m., 2 p.m., that sundowning starts, and they're throwing food, or they won't sit down to eat dinner, and to dose them about an hour before dinner or an hour before that known difficult time, and suddenly they're smiling and happy and ready to take their shower, or ready to they're ready for self-care. And I had a resident who, the husband's at another community. His wife is at one of the memory care communities that we do serve. And he said, "You know how I know when my wife's had her cannabis?" He goes, "She smiles, she's smiling." And that sense of well-being is just one of those benefits to cannabis. um, Taylor did a presentation to her corporate office, all the directors of wellness. They wanted to learn from her. They wanted to learn how this is helping to control those behaviors. And the possibility that you can have that positive impact on someone's life, that you can take them from having, losing sleep, tossing and turning because they're in pain, suffering from muscle spasms, not able to feed themselves anymore because their Parkinson's tremors have gotten so aggressive. When you provide this possibility that, hey, this is just something you might want to consider. We've heard and seen some of the research, and this is an option for you if you want to consider it. When you bring that up and you make it an option, and it changes their life, and suddenly they had a poor quality life, and suddenly they're able to go on a walk or play with their grandkids, or actually get some sleep in the night. It's you've positively impacted many people's lives at that point. So it's very gratifying. And how do you get here, right? What is that path? And I think it is important to explore, if your personal bias is holding you back. um, I hear from some organizations or some leadership that I talk to that, oh, it's federally prohibited, and we're skilled nursing, and we can't do that here. Well, you do have the legal right to do it. We'll talk a little bit more about the legalities soon. But are you not going and talking to your corporate office because of your own personal bias, because you're afraid of how they'll perceive you, or because you don't personally believe in it? Is that, or because your parents would frown upon it? I mean, where is that personal bias? People that are most aggressive against cannabis often had somebody in their lives that was addicted to drugs, and either died or just had a really horrible path with drug addiction. And I think what's important to note is, the war on drugs, the DARE program that was very prominent when I was in school, they actually removed marijuana or cannabis from the DARE list because it's a medicine. So, I love this cartoon because it's like this poor guy hooked up to life support, and he probably has many of those conditions that we just referenced. And you have this argument, right? You're just using it for the fun of it, the recreational high. Well, that's what Roger thought, and this was the only thing that helped Ain. So, in order to get here, I think it's important to just understand that for some of you, especially those that have grown up in very conservative families, maybe your dad was a cop, or maybe your mom was a principal, or you know, it's understanding that you have to shift that principle, the to get to the right mindset, and that the principles that you had in the past might not be valid in terms of making sense at this point. So let's just talk about and define what a principle is. It's a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior, or for a chain of reasoning. So, you know, we understand why you have a challenge. You've been told all your life that cannabis is bad. I mean, look at this. This is from the 30s, when, I mean, look how it's spelled, marijuana. I mean, that's a propaganda term. Weed with roots in hell, weird orgy parties. So the stigma, the propaganda that was put forth, it's understanding that that's what it was. And that there is real published science and research here. And if any of you want me to send you the research, I do that all the time. That's how we helped one, residential community get a policy and help a Huntington's patient that had horrible, spasms and uncontrollable movements and agitation. And, once he was educated that there's actual published research on the efficacy, and he found out you don't have to smoke it, that we can use an edible or an oil, that's when he changed his mind. And she had a 75% reduction in her uncontrollable movements. She was finally eating again. She was sleeping again. I mean, and it was based in him seeing the research. So if that helps to get your mindset right, so that you can adjust that initial principle where were told all your life that this is just anecdotal, well, that's false. And that principle was based on a falsity. So now it's time to get educated and shift that mindset. The stigma, that's what it was. This is from Reefer Madness, that taught the greater American community that that if you use marijuana, that you're going to rape women and you're going to go crazy and insane. So again, a lot of misinformation. But again, don't listen to me. Listen to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who said, we have been terribly misled. We've been terribly and systematically misled for 70 years in the United States. I'm upset because if I had known 20 years ago that my grandmother, after she had a massive stroke, if she was given right after that stroke, that hospital had a bottle of medical grade CBD oil, and they'd given that to her under her tongue right after her stroke, she might not have damaged the neurons to the extent where she lost her ability to speak. And the quality of life, we couldn't have conversations with her because she lost her ability to speak. She developed aphasia. That affected our whole family, our entire dynamic, all the communicating that we used to do. We couldn't do it anymore. And for her to sit there alone and not able to converse with us, it was traumatic for all of us. And that's how I stumbled across cannabis, because I was searching for a solution, and that's how a lot of parents find it. And look, we know we've been lied to. Look at the opioid crisis. Pharmaceutical companies told us that opioids were not addictive. I mean, and now, you're dealing with residents that have been on opioids for all the wrong reasons for decades, and now suddenly they're being forced off. And what is that alternative? Are you going to set up a cannabis policy so that they can use this as an alternative? Or do they have to move? Or do they have to use something from Tylenol and Advil that will damage their liver and kidneys and give them ulcers? So again, it's the mindset that what the government and pharmaceutical companies and our own physicians, who were lied to by the pharmaceutical companies, what they told us was not true. And again, there's more research to be done, but there's already a lot of published research out there. So it's just getting that mindset and understanding that um, that there's new science out there. And I think the biggest mindset is that you have the legal right. So in statute 36-2805, passed down from our own Arizona state legislature, in the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act, there was a specific stipulation for facilities. And it's not just assisted living and independent living and memory care, it's skilled nursing is listed in there. Rehab settings are listed in there. Um, Hospitals with long-term care units are listed on there. So they specifically have dictated through the language that they used and this policy that they do not want you to reasonably unlimit a patient's access to medical cannabis when their health care provider has deemed that it could be helpful for their health condition. And so, as long as you set up a medical cannabis policy and you follow that policy, then you are compliant with the state. So, a lot of people use the federal prohibition. Look, we understand, especially if you're running skilled nursing, you are highly, highly regulated. You don't want anything that could potentially ding you in your score. We get that. But there's never been one incident ever across the United States ever where a skilled nursing or hospital or any type of healthcare organization has faced any type of repercussion federally for using cannabinoids or cannabis as an alternative to opioids or other pharmaceuticals, and especially now. So we understand that there's a fear there, but understand that that fear has been planted in our head for fear mongering so that we wouldn't use this as a medicine. And if you can get that mindset and understand that there's a huge precedent for this happening across America, but tremendously happening in a lot of communities in Phoenix. We work with over 100 here. So if you're not using this, then you have the legal right. And to understand, again, with that mindset, that the only thing constant is change. The fact that we've been in federal prohibition for 70 years is alarming and startling, because things do change so quickly. But I think it's really been the information age, access to the internet, the fact that we can see little Charlotte with her seizures and that cannabis was the only thing that helped her, that we can see those images. I've talked to a lot of people that have seen those videos where people with, tremors so bad with Parkinson's that they can barely hold a pen, and they're given a couple drops of cannabis, and within minutes their tremors are reduced. So when people see that, they see the visuals, they can read it on the news, they have respected neurosurgeons, that's when change really starts to happen. And that's why this is a bipartisan issue. There's conservative Republicans that have really sick kids, really sick wives and parents that need this as a medicine. And that's why we have, 33 states now that have medical cannabis laws. So here's the path. Here's how you get here. First, you got to get educated. Knowledge is power. Again, if you want published research, we're happy to send it to you. This is some of the resources that we use. There's a ton of them. Some of the clinical trials that you'll see here have been done on neuropathic pain, rheumatoid arthritis, PTSD, multiple sclerosis, and again, all of this is published scientific research. So the next step would be to, once you're educated and you decide that you want to move forward with this and allow it as a healthcare option for your residents, then you'd need a policy. Now, we can customize one for you, or, give Dan a call. Dan at Auberge, thank you for letting me use your picture, Dan. A lot of assisted living owners and managers, administrators have reached out to Dan to learn how he's doing it, to see his policy, to understand any challenges that he's run into. So give Dan a call. He'll let you know. All the policies that we create are, of course, non-smoking policies. They prevent diversion, and they have a lot of different stipulations that protect you and your community from any citations from the state. And then the next thing, you might be educated, but, the family members have to be educated and the staff has to be educated. Instead of giving somebody a pill, they might be giving somebody a gummy and, giving a much nicer way of taking your medicine. So, but, again, they have to get that mindset too that, oh, this is a medicine now. And that, it comes in a little bit of a different form. It's not delivered by your local pharmacy. It's not bubble wrapped. Again, we still have a way to go to catch up with, the traditional medical world. But, this is important. And again, there's lots of different ways to use cannabis. It can, with the communities, we're usually using topicals, edibles, oils. That's mainly it. So right now, again, we're still a medical state and you would need a certification from a physician. We have access to mobile physicians that will come to your community. Obviously with COVID, there's restrictions. So some of the physicians that we work with also are doing telehealth now. And then there's also clinics that can be walked into if your resident is mobile. And then really it's, like I said, it's about finding the right administration method for them. Some communities that we work with don't want to allow tinctures because they're hard to measure and prevent diversion. But all of you use edibles. Edibles are probably the most common. They're very effective for chronic pain. Gummies can be cut in halves or quarters, and you can be very low dose. Tinctures can be helpful because you can microdose by milligram. So it's nice for us when we have a community that allows that, because some people have very sensitive body chemistries and they need really small microdoses. The great thing that we know about cannabis is you can keep the dose very low and achieve that symptom relief that you're looking for. So with anything else, it's about starting with a very low dose and then slowly titrating up to find the right balance. Recently we had a memory care patient that in Mesa, and hers was mainly like OCD and anxiety, and she would throw herself on the ground and she would wail and cry. And so we knew it was mainly kind of anxiety, and so we used a much higher CBD product. And she was very sensitive to THC. It made her really sleepy during the day, so we ended up moving the THC gummy to night. And then, and that was a 2-to-1 ratio. So that was 2 parts CBD to 1 part THC, but she was that sensitive to the THC. So we just moved that at night and put an even higher CBD product during the day. So, all of your residents will have different needs. And everybody will have a little bit of a different administration method that they do well with, or dosing strategy. So I guess what we want you to walk away with is it's important to be part of the solution. It's important to be an advocate for your residents. They might have their own, misinformation that they've been provided, that they need science-based information. And again, some of your residents, the ones that you sat there and you closed your eyes and you thought about those people that are being very, they're disturbing other residents, or they're making you have to call their families every single day. It doesn't have to be like that. Those residents might do well with clinical cannabis, a very low dose of clinical cannabis that might make it so they stop getting up in the middle of the night and banging down people's doors. These are people that don't have a great quality of life right now. And the other side of that is they could have restful sleep, a much better sense of well-being, eat better, sleeping better, socializing better, out of their chronic pain. Maybe relief for the first time that they've ever experienced true pain relief, or relief from their muscle spasms. We did an education for a group of nurses, 91-year-old nurse who had MS, who, when she started on a very low dose, she said it worked better than any of the pharmaceuticals she's ever been given. And that makes sense. I mean, MS is one of those conditions that has, published clinical trials on it. So we know it works. And it was very heartwarming to be the person that helped provide that solution to her. And you can be part of that solution too, as long as you're willing to, adjust that mindset, and get some education, science-based education. there's a lot to draw on now. So if you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for allowing me to present today.